Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode number 6 of the Odd Sports Topics podcast. I am Michael Rachel, alongside, as always, PJ Ellis. And we've got a pretty cool episode for all of you to watch here. But before we do that, please like and subscribe right here on YouTube down below. It would help us a lot. And share this with as many, sports fans as you know, so that they can start to learn about the odd things in sports. And then send them to our website at oddsportstopics.com to read all of our articles on the odds things in sports. And we have a new member writing for us now, Matt Costa. Go check out his article that he just wrote on the NBA lottery and how there's some conspiracy theories that go along with that, and how the format has changed from when the NBA first started. It was actually a coin flip to today where they used the ping pong ball. So go check that out. It's a very interesting article. We're very excited to have Matt. Go follow us on Twitter and Facebook, there we go, at Odd Sports Topics, so you can stay up to date basically with what we are doing. This week on our episode 6, we have a very cool guest. Last episode, we had PGA professional Adam Long, who is continuing to play really well on the PGA Tour. He now is into the second round of the playoffs this following week. He had a nice week. And I saw an article, not an article, but it basically said where people need to finish. I think if he has a finish of 33 or better, he moves on to the final round of the playoffs. So hopefully Adam gets a top 33 finish this week so he can play in the Tour Championship, last round of the FedEx Cup playoffs. So that was last week. But this week we have former NHL player Reed Lowe. Super great interview. PJ, you want to talk a little bit about who Reed is?
Yeah. First off, guys, I'm just going to say, episode 6 is kind of crazy. We're this episode's deep already. If you've liked this kind of string of guests we've had, let us know in the comments below. Make sure you like and subscribe so we can keep this content coming for you guys. We love doing these interviews, and we love, so far we've had 2. This will be a former professional player, and then last week we had a professional player in their sport, and the week before that we were one of the top NBA trainers in the industry. So we're on a roll here with the guest guys. Hopefully we can keep that content up if this is something you guys are enjoying. But yeah, this week we have Reed Lowe. Like Michael said, Reed is a former NHL player. He played 4 seasons with the St. Louis Blues and then 1 with the Chicago Blackhawks. Reed was your typical enforcer on the ice. He was known to get into a lot of fights and to protect his guys and rack up plenty of penalty minutes. He was in actually 115 fights in his NHL career, and he is the second most penalty minutes accumulated in a game with 57. So he tells a story about how he accumulated that, and it's a good one to hear. So yeah, we're excited to have Reed on, and we're excited to keep going forward. If you guys are wondering, Sarandon is no longer going to be joining us on the podcast. She has started school. So while she was with us, she was absolutely fantastic, and we're going to miss her a ton. So Sarandon, thank you for everything you did while you're here, and best of luck in school and moving forward.
Absolutely. And also with Sarandon being gone, that means the editing skills fall onto us, PJ. And as you know, I have a little bit of struggle editing right now, so bear with me. I know we're going to try to get some of Reed Lowe's fights into this episode. I can't promise anything, but we're going to try. And they might be sideways, so you might have to move your devices over to get the full effect of those fights. So you're just gonna have to bear with us for a couple weeks as we, figure out how to edit and become better at that. But yeah, big shout out to Sarandon. She made our lives a lot easier, and with all those edits, especially, it was just great quality that we really appreciate. One thing in this interview before we go ahead and get into it, PJ, we asked Reed about. Let me rephrase that. I wrote an article a while ago about why there's 3 periods in hockey rather than 2 halves or 4 quarters like we see in the NBA and NFL and other big sports. And one of the reasons for that was that the ice gets too scruffed up basically and becomes terrible if you play too long on it. So the NHL, during the intermissions, they put the Zamboni out on the ice. They clean up the ice so that the quality of hockey is better. And during timeouts and stuff like that, they have those people go out on the ice and scrape off, all the ice and clean it up there. So we asked Reed while he was playing if he noticed that, basically. Was there a difference in quality of play from the beginning of the periods compared to the end of the periods? And I wasn't expecting, this huge difference. He's like, it's just kind of just to make sure the quality of the game is, the best it can be, but it didn't really make a difference. But he was just like, yeah, no, it really makes a difference. And his coach even was like, the ice is going to keep pucks in the zone. So we got to force those pucks out of there. So that was a super interesting answer. And we'll put the link to that article in the description below to go check that out. PJ, was there anything else from that interview that you really took away?
Yeah, well, that alone too, I thought it was interesting. Your story, we kind of came to the conclusion when you wrote our article that the reason there is 3 periods is because the play deteriorates. But he took it to another level and saying, there's some different things that NHL teams are doing now to try to avoid that he didn't have back in his day, such as now they have the Blues Crew girls. I know in the St. Louis Blues they'll come out on stoppage play and they'll kind of scrape the ice themselves. And it was just interesting to hear him kind of talk about how that's advanced from his time of play than what it is to what it used to be. So that was interesting.
How much money would it take to get on the ice and fight Reed today?
Today, I don't know how he's looking today. He's I saw him playing the alumni game we had over All-Star break, and he was looking a bit out of shape there. And Reed don't hurt me for saying that. I don't think there's an amount of money you could pay me to take a punch from Reed Lowe.
Yeah, it would be up there for sure. One of the cool things about this interview is he's not like your ordinary, NHL player, so to say. And that's no disrespect to Reed whatsoever. It's just that, we usually don't see the stories of enforcers in the NHL. So to have him talk about what it was like to be an enforcer, a position that's not as popular in the NHL today as it used to be, for him to talk about that, I personally had no idea about most of the stuff he said because the enforcer, I thought these fights just kind of happen as they go rather than, some of the stuff he talked about. So
being a designated role. Yeah.
Yeah. So this interview was super cool for me just because it's something I had no idea about. And, for Reed to make a career out of it is super interesting. He talks about how he used to be a really good scorer and he was a really good scorer in the amateur when he was coming up, and then he transitioned to be a fighter. So that was interesting. It's just crazy.
It's just the mindset of it all too. You hear him say a couple times, the thing is, I'm not really a fighter. I don't really like to fight. It's not what I like to do. So just to have that mentality of saying, I'm not really an aggressive person. You might look at my stats and say, wow, 115 fights. And you might look at my videos and say, wow, he knows how to fight. But he talks throughout the thing. You'll hear him say many times, I wouldn't say I'm an aggressive person. I wouldn't say I'm necessarily angry or that fighter mentality, always on go. Anybody who knows me now would probably say I'm a gentle giant, but it's just interesting to see kind of the mindset of what it takes to be a fighter in the NHL.
Yeah, for sure. So we won't keep you guys anticipating this interview any longer. So here is our interview with former NHL player Reed Lowe. Enjoy. We now welcome on to the Outsports Topics podcast a former enforcer, bruiser, fighter, and great hockey player in the National Hockey League. In the early 2000s, he played for the St. Louis Blues and Chicago Blackhawks. He is Reed Lowe. Reed, thank you for being here today.
Thank you. And I'm not sure if I'm one of the great hockey players, but I guess I was pretty decent.
Best hockey player we've had.
That is for sure. Reed, since you played for the Blues and you work with the Blues alumni now, it'd be kind of remiss not to ask you about what are you seeing so far of the Blues in their playoff run, and how do you like their chances going into Game 6 and Game 7?
Well, I think everybody saw that. There's a lot of teams that came to play hockey, and Vancouver's one of them. Their goaltenders played extremely well, and they've challenged the Blues on the physicality that the Blues can bring. I don't think the Blues played physical enough in the first 2 games, but I feel like they raised their game over the last 3 games, even though they lost last night. A tough one after being up 3-1, just couldn't hold on to it. But I think they played well. I think they're it's a dogfight. The one thing that these guys have in their corner is they're the reigning champions, and they understand what it's like to be down 3-2, right? Stanley Cup final, same thing happened last year. So they are they're in a good spot. It's interesting to see how they are playing without Tarasenko, almost better. It's kind of weird how all season long, before the COVID stopped hockey, they played so well first place. And they lose him, and then he gets out of the lineup with more shoulder issues, and they've won 2 of the last 3. So they just got to play their game simple. They're a good hockey team, and Jake Allen's come in and played well for the boys. There's maybe 1 or 2 he might want to sneak back last night, but they got to play. They got to play harder in front of them, and they got to help protect that front of that net. And so hopefully they can get their physicality more consistent, I think, is really where they need to be.
Yeah, it was a tough one last night for sure. Switching gears a little bit, staying with the Blues. Obviously, last year they won the Stanley Cup, and that was huge for the city. And you got to be part of that as working with the alumni. You were part of the parade. You know, that whole summer with the Cup. What were some of your experiences you had with the Cup, and what was the best part about it?
You know, almost like being a kid going through, you know, the conference finals. And I've been to the conference finals before as a player in 2000, 2001 when we lost to Colorado, and who ended up going on and winning the Stanley Cup in 2001. So I've seen the craziness with the media and everything, but I've never been a part of a Stanley Cup finals as an alumni or as a player, or saw it at the level of people that were there and the amount of alumni that were coming into town to the alumni box and to try and be a part of everything that happened. And then obviously when they won, you know, I've been in St. Louis for 23 years now, or at least part of the St. Louis Blues for 23 years now. And to have played on the team, to have been that close, and then for them to finally win that first Stanley Cup championship was it was unbelievable. And I said it all along. You know, Market Street's seen a Super Bowl champion. They've seen a World Series champion, but that street will never be the same after the St. Louis Blues got done with it. And I think some of the shenanigans that went on and the delays that happened in the parade from the guys getting out of their cars and celebrating with the fans and letting fans drink out of the Stanley Cup and riding around on mopeds and puking in Mustangs and everything else that went down. Brett Hulsing and Gloria up on stage, all the different things that went down that day. You know, we thought it was going to pour. It rained in the morning, and then it was a beautiful afternoon. You know, it was, it's one of those moments in life that you can never probably even come close to repeating, because it was that first one and it was 53 years. And, you know, so to be a part of it, to watch it, one of the cool moments was they won Wednesday night. We had our Blues alumni golf tournament Friday morning, and then that night they had a deal for all the Blues alumni and spouses or significant others, and all the players, their wives, upper management, their significant others, and the deal is from 6 to 9, and that's all we really knew what was going to happen. And then all of a sudden they're like, all right, we changed the plans. They had like 4 or 5 of those trolley vehicles or whatever from Anheuser-Busch. And then we actually went into where the big beer vaults are at, and the guys were all signing up on this painting that they had up there. And then all of a sudden they started chanting guys' names, and they were like, Banner, Banner, and they would literally just pour like 5 beers in the cup, and then he would come over and they wouldn't even give a chance to drink it. They just dumped on him. So after they went through all the players, they started calling the players' wives up, and so they started dousing the players' wives with the beer as well out of the Stanley Cup. So that was kind of one of those moments, and everyone was jumping around, and there was 150 people packed into an area where if the fire marshal was there, he probably would have had a coronary. But it was just fun to watch those guys celebrate. It was a really, what was the coolest thing for me was watching the St. Louis Blues of today kind of share it with everybody that's been a Blues fan ever since the Blues came to town, and the way that the organization and the players, you know, treated the people, and obviously the alumni and everybody that was wanting to be a part of it was truly special. So kudos to those guys.
It was for sure a special time, and a special part of that celebration was that parade for sure. So we're going to get into your career a little bit in a second here, but first I want to ask you a quick question. So we here at Odd Sports Topics, we get into the odd things in sports, and one thing we've wrote about hockey is why they play 3 periods rather than 2 halves or 4 quarters and stuff like that. And one of the reasons is actually because the ice gets all roughed up and the quality of play gets worse if they were to play 2 halves, which they used to do way back when. Did you notice during your career that the quality of play was better during the beginning of the period than it was towards the end of the periods?
Yeah, without question. It's funny to watch, and us older guys, and you know, there's obviously guys that are older than me in the alumni, but we talk about how they have, you know, the guys and the gals skating around 2 or 3 different times a period, shoveling the ice. Well, when I played, there was nobody shoveling the ice, and you know, one of the rules of thumb at the end of the period, your coach was always saying, "Hey guys, ice is thick, ice is bad. Make sure you're strong on pucks. Get that puck out of the zone. You know, make sure you're doing the things," because there was the ice did get so choppy, and it was such a mess out there, which is obviously why they started to scrape the ice with the shovels in between some of the stoppages of play. But and I think there's different ice around the league that's better than others. And, some of the ice up in Edmonton is probably some of the best ice up in those colder areas. You get out into California and Arizona and Florida, and it's more challenging to try and keep, the ice frozen and the ice fresh. So I think there's a little bit of everything that comes into play with that. But these guys and the clean ice they consistently get to play on is definitely an advantage over the ice that we used to play on by the time the end of.
So during your career, you were known to be an enforcer. So sometimes we see, the enforcers stick up for their guys and stuff like that. So you had 115 fights recorded in your career, probably more than that. But are you actually mad at these guys when you're fighting them? Or are you like, oh, I just got to do this to stick up for my guy, and just more of like a tactical move to send them to the box with you? Or what was the meaning behind fighting?
I think like for me, when I first started fighting, I was like my midget AA year, I led the team in scoring. And the next season I went to a junior camp and I scored a few goals in the inter-squad game, and I got in a fight with the two guys, and the coach had put the two tough guys on the other team for a reason. And so they both came after me, and I dummied them up. And the coach is like, hey, you think you can do that again? I'm like, yeah, sure. Does it mean I'm going to make the team? He's like, yeah. I'm like, okay, well, you point them out, I'll take them out. Like, I'm good. Let's do this. And so for me, it was the role started just knowing that I was willing to do whatever it took to realize my dream of making the NHL. And when my skating and skills got to a point where they were beneath the 23 players that were going to make a team, I had to take myself into another level and take myself into another realm. And so fighting was that for me. When it comes to why we do it on the ice, over the years, you kind of understand and learn there's momentums to the game that are kind of, you try and switch. And there was almost what some would consider, I think someone even wrote a book on the code, right? The enforcement of the fighting code. If a guy they knock a guy to the ice, you don't just sit on his chest and keep pounding away on him. There's some things that come into where you want to try and keep it as fair as possible. There's two linesmen there that are ready to break it up at any time. You don't want to throw punches after. If you punch a linesman in the head, that's not nice, but there's multiple reasons why we get in a fight. So typically during the beginning parts of the season, you're going to get in fights with all the tough guys just to kind of have that jostle to see who's the toughest guy, right? Who's come into camp, who's come into the season. And for me, I used to chase guys around at the beginning of the season just so that I could get my teammates to feel like they were more protected, right? If Reed Lowe was on the bench, if Reed Lowe was on the ice, they were able to be 2 inches taller and 20 pounds heavier and not have to worry about anybody taking a liberty on them. So there was that part of the fighting. I was a tough guy, but that was part of the fighting that I didn't love. What I did love was when somebody did something on the ice, or if we were down by 2 or 3 goals and I had to go out and get something sparked up, that was my time to really get out there and make a difference. And that was when I was at my toughest, especially if somebody was picking on one of my teammates. Like, it's on like Donkey Kong, you're not going to do this. And there, as you see in my stats that you'll probably get into, I have multiple games, only minutes in a game, because I would just go out and unloosen the screws in the back of my head and just let it go. So there's different reasons, but mostly it's a momentum thing. It's a power thing. Who's the toughest guy in the league type of thing. And then at the end of the day, there's protecting your teammates. So it's a little bit of balance of both or all three.
You mentioned that when you were out on the ice, your teammates would feel 2 inches taller, 20 pounds heavier. Do you think that fighting being allowed in hockey deters, that dirty play, those clippings and cheap shots, because they know that, consequences are coming from the enforcers on teams?
I think it's really simple. Like, I think it's fair for me to say that the best hockey player in the NHL over the last 15 years, in my opinion, has got to be Sidney Crosby. And when I take a look at his stats, obviously they're not near what Gretzky did in the 80s. And the game was different in the 80s, don't get me wrong. But, Gretzky didn't even get body checked, let alone spend 2 significant times on the IR from a concussion like he has. And so when you look at the way the game is today and the chippiness that's played, that Marchand or that little pest player and the stuff that those guys get away with today that they never got away with before, right? The guys that did that back in the 80s and 90s, they had to fight every once in a while, you know what I mean? And these guys don't really have to do that anymore. And, when I played, I averaged somewhere in those 20 to 25 fights a season when I was in the NHL. And before my generation in the late 80s and early 90s, it was 30, 35. And I think Paul Laws has the record for most fighting majors in a season with like 42 or 43 or something like that. And that's just an insane amount of fights. And so I think that the game has changed in a way that I don't like, because I think that the players are more protected by having that tough guy on the ice. And for me, I tell this to people all the time about the enforcer role is, if I didn't have that role, I would have never made the NHL. I'd have never had the opportunity to make the NHL. I would have never had the opportunity to become the hockey player that I did, because I worked extremely hard on my skills after practice and in the summertime to make sure that I wasn't a liability on the ice. And, that enforcement role was something that was the hardest one. And there was many sleepless nights and many sleepless afternoon pregame naps. And, when you had to go against George Laraque or Bob Probert that night, or Donald Brashear was coming to town and you knew that you were going to be in a nasty one. But it was what gave it to me. And I think that tough guys and enforcers along the line have a special appreciation for the National Hockey League, because it wasn't just their hockey skill that got them there. It was about being the ultimate teammate and putting the ultimate sacrifice on yourself in order to better your team and your teammates. And I think that most guys get, most hockey players that played the game and played with a guy to role in that guy for doing it, because it's not easy.
So you spoke about obviously you're fighting a lot of the same guys throughout a year. Do you guys kind of form like a brotherhood, especially after you retire? Is that something that you guys kind of like, you kind of have a close bond because you have a lot of the same experiences and you guys kind of went through a lot of the same things?
100%. It's fun to it was fun. I got in a fight with PJ Stock, the good old punch in the face contest that is on YouTube. I think it's one of the most hit fights on YouTube. And that was an afternoon game. There was 15 minutes left in the third period. We're standing out there and I'm like, hey, I go, we're not going to get another shift tonight. I said, but it's a close game. You want to put a show on for the fans? He's like, yeah, let's get after it. So we knew we were just going to go bananas on each other. And I fought him probably 10 or 12 times, and pound for pound, he's one of the toughest guys around. But we went for beers that night. We were at the same bar because there's guys on both teams that were friends. And so we were actually taking pictures with people. And I got a little shiner and he's got a shiner and had a cut over the bridge of his nose. So without question. And is there guys that I didn't really like or didn't, on the ice? Yeah. But for the most part, that enforcer role is something that we all know how hard it is. And even the guys that were the toughest in the league, that's almost tougher position, because you got everybody chasing you down and you're getting everybody's best fight that night. And so I think there's a good brotherhood of it today. It's fun to be a part of the alumni. I never realized how much fun it was going to be to get to know these guys after the game of hockey, as I did when I played against them, and in some cases played with them. So cool role. And we have some good laughs and some good chats about it today.
Funny Reed Lowe story real quick. I don't know if you remember, some game this season, we were in the alumni suite and I was kind of messing with you, just going back and forth. And you turned to me and you go, look up my fight with PJ. And I was like, okay. So I went on my phone, looked at the fight. And you said, yeah, don't mess with me ever again. And I did. I was done with you messing with you that night. I was like, yep, I see what you've done to a PJ before. I don't want any problems. So I was done with you that night. But switching gears a little bit, you talked about, obviously, you kind of knew you had to fight. How did you train in the off season? Was a lot of it, were you preparing for fighting? Were you preparing for hockey? Were you doing a little bit of both? What was that like going through an off season, knowing you had to fight a ton going into that next year?
So a little different as I kind of moved my way through the game. When I first started my first year in junior, that year that I made it, I was a right-handed fighter, and I never really ever threw a left because I never really had to, or I wasn't trying to get strategic in how I was fighting. And at the end of that season, my first season, I'd done real well in that league. I was a 17-year-old rookie, and so I was one of the younger players in the league, and I was beating some guys up. And towards the end of the year, the gym that I was working out in, I tied a tensor bandage around the heavy bag, and I held onto it with my right hand, and I just threw punches as many and as fast and as hard as I could with my left hand until my arm felt like it was going to fall off. And then I would kind of shake it out and give it a rest. And I did that a couple times every day at the end of my workout, just so that I could kind of get used to doing that. And then I went back the next year, and next thing you know, they tie up my right hand, I'd switch over my left, and I would start knocking guys out because they were expecting rights, and all of a sudden you get hit with the left and you've got yourself braced on the right side of your face, and then the next thing you know, something comes from the other side and it kind of knocks you down. So then I started to go throw both hands, and that's when I started to become a little bit dangerous because the guys didn't know what way I was coming from because I threw my both hands. So then once I established that I could punch with both hands, I got into the pro hockey, and I started doing some of the different things like that. I started working out with boxers, and I started working on perfecting my punching power and making sure that I was maximizing the strikes that I was getting. A lot of other things I would do is I was always trying to get a helmet off, right? I didn't want to hurt my hands on a helmet, except for the one time that I fought Ty Domi and I got his helmet off. And then after I hit him in the head, I kind of wished his helmet was back on his head. His head's so hard, but yeah, it's something that you work on and you train on. We used to have a guy that used to dropthegloves.com is what it was called. Brian and Canunez, can't think of his last name. It starts with a K. Anyways, he used to do it, and man, this is back before your guys' time when we used to have VHS tapes, but he used to send me VHS tapes all the time, and he would go and take all these video clips from all these different minor league teams and NHL teams, and he would put them all on one tape, and he would send the tape to me so that I could watch other guys' fighting styles and how they were going to do it. And I remember when I first got to the NHL, Kelly Chase had just retired the year before, so he spent a lot of time before the game with me. He would always come down and talk to me about who I had to fight that night and what he knew about them, and some of the things he could do to maybe give me a leg up or some sort of an advantage. So you were always doing everything you could to keep yourself safe, right? I have a bad day at the office, I'm looking up at the lights. And so at the end of the day, there's a fear factor that comes along with it. But yeah, it's something you definitely have to work on.
Yeah, I can't really even imagine that, honestly. But obviously this is a really weird time for sports, and we see the NHL going into this bubble format with no fans. How would that change your approach to the game, playing in that setting with no fans in a bubble? All your games in one arena. How would that change how you play your game or how you prepare?
Well, I think the one thing, and I've talked about this a little bit in some of the other interviews that I've done, but the one thing I think that these guys can relate to is that you would travel for those exhibition games, and in this setting everything's in one area, and they're locked down hotels or whatever the bubble looks like wherever they're at, all that different kind of stuff. So I think that what these guys are probably trying to feel like and relating this to is training camp, because we have to go out and make a hockey team, right, in training camp, and we have to play at a high level of hockey to show that our worth is worth the team. And there's typically not very many fans in training camp. And when we used to have it down at Enterprise Center, which when I played was called the Scott Trade Center, I think, there's no fans that were allowed in there either. So you practice in the rink. It's a little different, but to be honest with you, it's something that the guys probably overcome. We don't hear a lot of the fans unless we're sitting on the bench anyways. Like when you're on the ice, you can hear the cheering and the stuff in the background, but your mind is so engaged on what you're doing on the ice, you're not really focusing on the fans anyways. But it's obviously different not to have them, because there's going to be echoes and there's going to be some different things that are going to go on in the rink that are going to sound differently, like the smack of the glass with the puck or off the boards. Having 20,000 people in an arena is going to have a different echo effect. So there's going to be some things that are different for them, but I think that hockey players are just professional athletes in general have an ability to adapt and figure things out. So I'm sure that it's just kind of become a little bit of a new normal. They've all got 8 or 10 games under their belt now, playing in this system. So I think it's something that they could all get used to. And then at the end of the day, it really is not an unfair or fair advantage to anybody, because they're all playing on the same level playing field. So.
While doing some research about you, Reed, we came across that in one game you had 57 minutes in penalties, And I'm going to assume that was like an ejection and not you just going into the box, coming out and just fighting the same guy over and over for like the whole game. Do you remember the
Yeah.
story behind the 57 minutes in that one game?
Oh yeah, it's a tough one to forget. It's the second most penalty minutes ever in an NHL game. So we were in Calgary, and my entire family was there. They used to come up to all the games in Calgary and Edmonton. And I got in a fight, actually, ironically enough, with Craig Berube in the first period. So that was my first fighting major of the game. And it wasn't much of a fight. We kind of, rustled around, and then we ended up falling to the ice. So it wasn't much going on there. And then I don't know, probably it might have been the third period, second period. I think it was the third period. It might have been the first period. You know what? It was one of the periods. I don't remember which one. Anyways, Bob Boutner was playing defense for the Calgary Flames. In my opinion, like 3 Mississippi, and Dougie had went to turn and go change, and Bob Boutner came in and went and hit checked him, and actually like injured Doug pretty severely, where he tore the muscle right off his pelvis and was out for the rest of the season. He came back and tried to play in the playoffs a little bit, but he was very ineffective and could hardly move. So at that point in time, I'm like, all right, it's time. You want to take our best player out. This is when that moment comes around. And so Joel puts us, me and Tyson Nash, Jamal Mayers, Bryce Salvador. I don't know, I forget who else was out there, but and their coach was Bob Hartley. He actually put out some of their guys that weren't tough and didn't have Bob Boutner on the ice. And I kind of looked back and I was like, really? You're not going to put him out here? Okay, well, I'll take one of the little guys out. And then they had last change, obviously, because we were in Calgary. And so he ended up putting out some of his tougher guys. Clark Willem, he put Boutner on the ice. Robin Regier was out there. Chief was out there. So they dropped the puck, and they win the faceoff, and it goes to the one defenseman on the right wing, or on their left side of the ice, which was my right side of the ice. And so I skate to try and attack the puck with him. He goes D to D, and Bob Boutner plays the puck up the boards, and I just drop my gloves about the hash marks and grab a hold of him, throw him up against the glass, and just start tagging him, and then he falls to the ice, and I just come down on top of him, and I'm just jamming him right in the back of the head. And then the rest of the guys come over, and they start getting into fights. I think Jamal Mayers was fighting Clark Willem, and then everybody else was kind of just paired up. And then the ref had me, and Robin Regier came over, and he was beaking me a little bit. And so I just kind of reached out and slapped him in the face. And then he took a swing at me. And so then we got in a fight. And then at that point in time, I think I had my jersey had been ripped off. I didn't have shoulder pads or elbow pads. I just had my undershirt, my sleeveless undershirt on, and I was skating across the bench, and their team was beaking at me, and I was trying to pretend like I was going to go get in their bench, but obviously the refs were holding me back. And so I got 2 fights in that shift, and I got 3 game misconduct penalties, a 10-minute misconduct for instigating, a 2-minute instigator penalty, and 3 fighting majors. So you get 10 minutes for each of those misconducts. So that's how you get to the 57 penalty minutes.
So were you not ejected, like officially?
Oh yeah. I got.
You got tossed. Okay.
It was hit the showers early, kid.
That is definitely an odd story, but we here at Odd Sports Topics, obviously, we explore the odd things in sports that people kind of look at normally. I'm sure playing in the NHL, you have an odd thing you've encountered.
Probably the oddest thing I've ever seen in hockey was last year, the year before, whatever it was, when one of the Blues players, I think it was Bertuzzo, dumped the puck in, and it went off Tim Peel's cup and went in the net and got scored on. That's probably the oddest thing I've ever seen. And I'm actually good buddies with Tim Peel, and I was texting with him and talking to him about it. And I said, do you think he'd ever be the first rep to get credited with a goal? Like, now that's really unfair behavior. It's one thing to call a goal, but to actually have it go off you and in the net. So yeah, he was. It's a funny joke, and like I said, probably one of the oddest things. It's some of the crazy things, like watching guys get body checked through glass and have that happen right in front of you. It's pretty intense to see that kind of stuff. And you're like, whoa! And then to hear a piece of plexiglass shatter is one of those things. Is like a car accident. It's that your ears recognize that in a real quick, you're like, whoa, what's that? And all of a sudden they're just plexiglass in a million different pieces.
So going back to your fighting real quick. So of the official 115 fights, all the fights you were in, were there ever times where you were like, I don't really feel like it, and you turned down a fight, or did every time you were just like, well, this is kind of my role, I got to do it whether I want to or not?
There was times that I turned fights down. It wasn't very often, but as we started to kind of move into where hockey is today, that transition of this, what I'm going to call the extinction of the true enforcer, started kind of in my generation in that early 2000s, where before in the 80s and 90s, if the one team got up 3-0 in the first period, the two tough guys would come out, they would duke it out. One would be fighting to keep the momentum, the other would be fighting to change the momentum, and typically the players would go out and have a good hard fought battle after. Where I think today, when things get a little out of hand and it's 5-0, that's where you see some of the dirtiness come out. Slew foots, high sticking, guys slashing each other, swinging their sticks at each other, the ridiculousness that goes on in the game today. So again, that stuff didn't happen before because there was somebody there to referee it within the jersey wearing guys, not just the referees, right? It's one thing to be scared of the referee. It's another thing to know that Reed Lowe's going to hunt you down for the next 42 minutes for being an idiot, right? That's not something guys really wanted to be a part of. And so I think that from that standpoint, you
kind of mentioned your role was better or more prominent in the league than it is today, but are there any NHL players that you look at now and you're like, oh, I kind of wish they played in my day so I could have dropped the gloves with them?
Honestly, I've never been in a street fight or a bar fight. I don't like to fight. I really don't, I'm good at arguing, I guess, if you were to ask some of my friends and my family members. But I don't really look at the game today or even in the past and wish that I could have gotten a fight with somebody, because it's not that I didn't want to do it to begin with, because I knew that I had to do it. It was something that I was doing as a job, not as something, I didn't get out of hockey and want to go get into the UFC or, stuff like that. Like I did it. I wanted to be a hockey player, and I just had to be a hockey player and a fighter to get where I needed to get. So I don't really have those kinds of moments, but there's times a lot where people will talk about, hey, do you think that you could take Ryan Reeves? I get that question a lot from people in St. Louis. And first off, Ryan's a really tough guy, but the role was different when I did it than when he did it. And like I said, I think that everybody has a chance to knock somebody out or win the fight, right? It doesn't matter. When you get to the NHL, you're one of the top 30 toughest guys in the world on skates. You've proven yourself to be somebody that can handle it, right? So there's a fine line between the number 30 toughest guy in the league and the number 1 toughest guy in the league, because that number 30 guy, he catches his number 1 in the chin in the right area, and that guy's going down. I don't care who you are. Nobody's in that to not getting hit in the right spot and hitting the ice hard with their eyes closed. And I think that there's always that generational gap too. Like I look back and look at guys like Marty McSorley and be like, man, I'm kind of glad I didn't have to fight him, but I fought Bob Probert, who fought Marty 72 times, you know what I mean? And Ty Domi and Donald Brashear and George LaRocque. And so, there's that kind of thing. And then there's I look at the guys that were after me and I'm like, they're kids to me. They were little kids when I was a tough guy, so I wasn't scared of them, right? I can take a 20-year-old down today, that kind of thing. So I don't really look back at it or forward at it, but there is a moment where you're like, man, I'm kind of glad I didn't have to fight him, because Marty McSorley was one of the baddest men ever to play the game.
Switching gears a little bit, Reed, to kind of more what you're doing today. Obviously, you work at Power Play Beverage and your hair salon and a bunch of different stuff you're doing. But one of the big things you do is working with the Blues alumni. What kind of you want to kind of get in, and work with them and do more of a hands-on role with the Alumni Association?
Well, the Terry Yake was doing it for probably 8 years, and then he decided to go get a business venture out in California, and so he moved away. And so there was a vacancy in the alumni, and so we talked with the Blues and talked with the board and decided that we were going to take, Bruce's role with the Blues was kind of changing, and they had filled kind of the roles that he had done before, and they kind of wanted him to get more into an alumni role, like an in-office alumni role. And so they hired me to kind of be help with the events and help with the alumni box and be in a face that somebody could kind of get to know outside, build some relationships, go build some new sponsorships, bring some more dollars in so that we can help the different charities around St. Louis that we help. And there was a role there, and I was kind of going through a transition at the job that I was working at, to where I was getting ready to leave, and I had these other businesses that I was doing, and I needed something to support that. And that alumni role for me and the alumni and what they needed from me and what I needed from them just kind of crossed paths at a good time. And it's sucks that we have to deal with it with this COVID thing, because we've had to postpone and cancel a bunch of stuff, and it looks like we're going to get a golf tournament and our fantasy camp in this year. But I miss going to the games. I miss being a part of it. I miss raising money. I miss having fun, because we put these events on and they're actually a good time. We get to have some beers and tell some stories and do some fun stuff. And so it's been something I've missed over the past 5 or 6 months, but hopefully we can figure this thing out and get to a point where we can start to participate again and feel comfortable being around each other.
Yeah, obviously the Blues alumni is one of the best alumni associations in the NHL, and also honestly probably in all of sports if you take a look at it.
Yep.
I have to ask this question and put you on the spot here, Reed. Who is the best ever Blues alumni intern?
I don't want to get the other ones mad at me, but Pete, you're pretty good. I'll tell you that. You take care of me when I need you. You respond to me all the time. You're a badass, buddy.
Sorry, Josh. Sorry, Skylar. I had to ask
Josh.
it. I had to put him on the spot. I had to put him on the spot.
Well, Reed, we really appreciate you coming on today and giving us some insight into a world that I for sure didn't know much about, which is the enforcer role in the NHL. So super cool to hear your stories, and thank you so much for being here.
Oh, my pleasure, guys. Anytime. It's always good to get on these things and reminisce and tell some stories and have some fun with it, and maybe make someone laugh for a minute or two, and maybe brighten a day up that's not so bright somewhere.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thanks, Reed.
That is our interview with former NHL player Reed Lowe. Big thanks to Reed for joining our podcast and being a great guest. Hope you guys all enjoyed that interview. I do apologize for the audio that got cut out here and there for a couple of seconds. My internet connection was unstable when we were recording, so we're going to make sure that doesn't happen in the future. So thank you for bearing with us on that. Make sure to go follow us on Twitter and Facebook at Odd Sports Topics, and visit oddsportstopics.com. For PJ and myself, Michael Rachel, I appreciate you guys listening. Goodbye.